Hello there, everyone. This is Pittsburgh Pat, and I'm here with Ann Linaberger. How are you today, Ann?
I'm well, thank you.
It's great to see you. Ann is a journalist, a musician. She volunteers. But one of the things that I love about Ann is she is an excellent baker. She shared her ginger snaps recipe with me, and that's how we bonded, actually, I think. But we'll get back to that later.
Yes.
Let's talk about some serious. So how are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
Well, that's
I went
great.
to the gym this morning and that was good. So
Yeah. I took a long walk today too. It was beautiful. Yesterday, actually, did you see the eclipse by any chance?
I did not.
I did the typical eclipse chaser kind of thing where the conditions were absolutely horrible. And so I tried to change my location and went to the observatory and got there and there was fog everywhere. So
Excellent.
driving home, I found there was a football field near my house. So it was a large expanse and the sun was just up over the horizon and was just able to see it through the haze. So I caught maybe like the last minute of it. But
Well, my fun interaction with nature was that I went to my nephew's graduation in Northern Virginia, where they're having the invasion of the cicadas.
oh gosh.
So they were everywhere on the trees, on the house, at the graduation, dive bombing us in the head.
Oh my gosh.
So that was interesting. But the
So
graduation was awesome.
were they passing out construction helmets or something? I mean,
No,
protective gear. Every
no.
17 years, the protective gear has to come out.
Yeah, we were just kind of swatting them out of the way, so we were good.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. Yes, awesome. So let's get into what we're here for. We were talking about. I like to talk to writers a lot because I consider myself a writer, and
Mhm.
I know that you're a journalist and you did a lot of broadcast news actually.
Did.
So that's a little different from what I do. I usually do like creative writing, although I'm starting to get into it a little bit with this sort of format, sort of talk show format.
Hmm.
But what do you think like the main difference between the medias that you like have the media that you have participated in, like broadcast journalism or print or like writing for video? What do you think are like some of the big differences like that you would think would be like something you would point out to somebody who's trying to just differentiate?
Well, I would say a couple of things. So first of all, I'm with you. I'm a storyteller and I love to hear people's stories and I love to tell them. But in broadcast media, in many cases, it could be the length of the story. So there might be a story that's two sentences that we write about in the broadcast media. And that's because we think that the person who's consuming that media, if you will, that's all they need to know. But then there could be longer pieces that we do where we really want to expound upon the person's stories. And those are my very favorites. Although I can write in sort of any level of broadcast, if you will. So short, medium, long. It really depends on what kind of story you have to tell and the people that are in that story.
So when you're putting together like a program, like just say you're doing a half-hour news program, although of course there's
Hmm.
commercials. So let's say 20 minutes. So
Hmm.
are you going to pepper that with some really short ones and then some longer ones, and like kind of like vary the styles within the broadcast? Or are you going to go, okay, we're going to do 30 seconds for each one of these things?
Well, I would say in the newscasts that I've produced, you're absolutely right. The pace of the newscast is important. So there will be longer stories, shorter stories. Um, we always talk about like a newscast. It has the word news in it. So, and new is in news. So there has to be some new information in it as well. And so it's really, you get a sense of what a newscast looks like the more you do it, and what your audience expects. And I think they expect, at the top of a newscast, they expect what's happening right now. And
Mm.
as you build a newscast sort of down into it, then you're presenting the information that might not be an immediate thing that somebody needs to know about, but a story that somebody would be interested in viewing.
Right. So I've often heard of journalistic article or journalism articles as written in kind of an inverted pyramid. So like the most important things at the top, and then it kind of like filters down so that when someone is editing your work, that they can like they can see where the most important facts are. They don't have to go hunting for them and move them back up the top. So if they're cutting for length, then they can easily chop off the end of it. Is that still used? I mean, that's what I learned a long, long time ago, but is that
You know,
sort of technique still used?
I think so. What I would say to you is that I wouldn't chop off the end, because the way I teach, and I've done some teaching as well, the way I teach set or story construction is that, it's more of a diamond construction. So the person is at the top, the information is at the middle. Um, you come back to the person at the end. So you wouldn't necessarily want to chop off the end of the story. And I still view it that way too, that I think that the end of a story kind of wraps it up with a bow, if you will. And so, and I think Prince stories are dealt with in the same way, that I get, um, I'm drawn into the story by the person whose story is being told at the beginning. You can deliver to me the information in the middle, but then I want to come back to a conclusion. And I think that's the way we read books too, right? That
Sure, you introduce
there's
a
got to be a
character.
conclusion.
You become familiar with a character, you introduce a character, and then we, if you don't establish a connection with the main character right off the bat, I mean, I'll give you a few pages as a reader. As a writer, I'll give you a lot of pages, but as a reader, I'm really only going to give you about 3 to 5 pages. And if you're not grabbing me, I'm sorry, but it's the next book on the shelf, because there's only so many books you can read in a lifetime. And I'm not going to waste my time on one that isn't going to grab me, right?
And I do think newscasts and individual stories are crafted that way, that if I don't care about a person in a story, I always say to the students I teach, so let's say somebody's house burns down, right? You could tell me when it happened, where it happened, how it happened, but I don't care about it until I find out the who it happened to. And if you introduce me to the person that it happened to, now I start to care about the fire. And so that's one of the things that I've talked to a lot of my students and my colleagues and younger colleagues about in TV news, is that we have to make people care about the story. Then they'll listen to the information about it. So if I care about the person whose house was burned down, now I'll listen to the rest of the information.
Yeah, I find it a really, I don't know what the right adjective is, but an example that I find which really reinforces this is the Olympics. When I see the Olympics, there's a point where they have, before they show the event, they have to tell you the backstory of all of these athletes, because, yes, I can watch the event and say, wow, these are really amazing, stellar physical specimens of humanity who can do these amazing things much better than I can. But unless I know anything about them, I'm just going, well, I'm rooting for number 3,
Well, so now I'm going to ask you, do you like that? Because I think I've met people who find those annoying, those stories.
I do find them annoying, but they work. Okay. So here's the thing. While I do find sitting through that, because I really just want to watch, like, whatever the event is, I want to see
competition, right?
Yes. So if there is a way to, if there's an innovative way to combine those things, like do it while the events are happening, or to intersperse that biographical information while they're also explaining the rules of the game. I mean, that's a difficult setting, I think. That's a really,
it's absolutely challenging.
Yes.
But don't you find yourself rooting for somebody that, you hear their story of, like, they grew up in poverty and they were able to make it to the Olympics, and, I'm glossing over the whole story, but
right.
Don't you find yourself rooting for that person?
I do. And that's what I'm saying. Like, my conscious thought is, boy, I really hate sitting through this exposition. But then as I enjoy, it makes my enjoyment of the competition even better.
Then you're like, dude, go.
Yeah. Can we just do this? Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but that's funny though.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, I think that goes back to the last thing I'll say about this, is that I think stories are the key. So what I've done as a journalist is tried to tell people stories. And you're right, in a newscast, there are going to be stories that are 2 sentences long, but the real stories are the stories about people and their stories. And that's what I've enjoyed and still continue to enjoy about what I do as a journalist, is that I love to listen to people. I love to hear their stories. And then I love to figure out a way to tell those stories that expresses what they're trying to express and is respectful of what it is that's going on with them. So going back to like the person whose house burned down, obviously I want to be respectful to the fact that they've lost everything, but I want to hear their story too. And I think that's what sort of grabs the audience and causes them to want to watch.
I had a writing professor tell me that in order to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. But what you point out, I think, is really important for reporters, is that you have to be a really good listener, and that's really key, I think, because when people tell you their stories, it's what we connect with, that human element. We connect with the emotional level, like you said, the facts are the facts, but not presented in a way that's going to engage me. It's not going to help me to, I mean, it's actually, almost doing me a disservice as somebody who's viewing it too, because it's not going to sink in, because I'm just hearing, 4-alarm fire in Beltshoover. Oh, well,
Whatever.
That doesn't really do anything for me unless I live in Beltshoover. And that's the other thing I wanted to ask you. So how many times do you have to say place names during a podcast? Because it seems like very specific, like especially like weather forecasts. It seems like the more place names and neighborhoods you can say, the better, Is that by design?
It is a little bit, and sometimes not. So you bring up two different things. So news reports, absolutely, you need to say where it is, because even if I don't live in Beltshoover, that might be some place that I've been. And I have a friend who lives on a street in Beltshoover, so I want to know if this event is happening there. Weather is completely different. So yes, by design, we would mention, back when I was in TV news, we would definitely mention different areas in a regular weather forecast. So let's say it's a nice day and we're just going to pick out a bunch of towns or cities to mention. We would definitely make a point to mention regional cities as well as communities within Allegheny County, which is where the TV station is that I worked for. And but in severe weather, in that case, you better be mentioning specific cities, because people want to know if the tornado's headed my way, and it's going to get here in 5 minutes, you better say my town. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of the way that we dealt with it.
It does answer my question, especially the severe weather, as you're saying. That's a necessity. But what I was thinking of, the sunny 53 degrees in Avalon, Bellevue, Ben Ave, and blah, blah. And I think what they're trying to do is it's like when someone says your name, there's a part of your brain that lights up and it just fires, and like, oh, I know that place, or yes, that's where I live, or so it's a way to draw people into the news, into the broadcast.
Absolutely.
If their mind
I
is
would
wrong.
agree with you on that. Yes.
Cool. Well, speaking of severe weather, you were telling me once about a time you had a power failure at the station. How did that go? That must have been interesting.
Well, so that's long story that I'll make short. So it wasn't necessarily a power failure, but we had a flood at the station, and people may remember this. I'm going to say it was the late 2000s that this happened, and it was in early August, and there was a major water main break on Fort Duquesne Boulevard. If I hadn't said already, I was the news director at KDKA TV. Water main break on Fort Duquesne Boulevard, which was right outside of our station, flooded the entire Gateway Center complex. Anybody who's ever been there would know that they're all connected by tunnels, and so to have a flood there was disastrous because the water went to all 4 or 5 buildings. Long story short, our station was flooded. Luckily, we had prepared for disaster, and so we had a generator. People kind of just jumped into action. We had people, our studio wasn't able to be operated at the very beginning. People jumped outside, and we put up the masts on our microwave trucks, and we were able to stay on the air. I was on vacation at that time, so that's another interesting thing, or maybe not, that the news doesn't happen at times that are convenient for us. And so I was on vacation, but I was only about 2.5 hours away, so My husband and I got in the car, I drove back, and we operated for probably 2 weeks on generator power with a flooded basement. A lot of our equipment was destroyed, but we managed to stay on the air. And I think that's, that's kind of what television news does too, is that we don't sort of throw up our hands and say, well, we just can't do it. No,
The show
we have
must go on.
what we have to do to stay on the air, and we did.
Do you, so that brings up an interesting question. Are you on call, like when you do that sort of thing? Or is it just like, okay, if there's a major disaster, of course, call me. But like, how do you delineate that? Like,
Well, so I would say when I was working as the news director, which I no longer am, but yes, I was on call 24/7.
okay.
So I could get calls at 3 o'clock in the morning, calls when I walk in the door from the end of my day at 7 o'clock at night, I would get phone calls. One of the things that I did was that I hired really smart managers to manage their parts of the day or the shows that they were doing. And I trusted them to make good decisions. And I trusted them to know when they needed to call me because it was a disaster. But otherwise, if it was a decision that they could make, we'd talk about it the next day. And if I agreed, I would say so. And if I disagreed, we would talk about how they might make it differently later. But one of the things that I did was hire great employees and trust them to do their jobs. But yes, in answer to your question, I got many calls.
Tara and I, we ran a small business. We had a pottery studio and we basically did it ourselves. We didn't have any employees. But I said, at some point, if this grows enough, we're going to have to hire people because we're not going to be able to actually do all of the work ourselves. And as you said, you have to hire people that you can trust, obviously, to do things. But I think it's important for people to realize as you rise in levels of management, or as if you have a small business, as it grows, you're gonna reach a point where you cannot physically be everywhere where something has to be done. And
Well, I would say to you, Patrick, too, that not only do you have to hire people that you can trust, but then you have to trust them. And I've seen a lot of people that, I feel like they've hired people that they felt like they can trust, but they felt like they still needed to micromanage everything.
mm,
And I guess you can do that, but at some point with the 24/7 job that I had, I wasn't willing to be awake 24/7, if you will.
right.
So I had to trust my people to do my colleagues to do what I assigned them to do. And you know, as I would say to a lot of them, very rarely would we make a fatal decision.
Right.
So make a decision. We can all sort of regroup about it later and decide if it was the right one or not. And if it wasn't the right decision, then we'll talk about it and make the right decision the next time. So that's sort
That's
of my management style, if you
that's
will.
great. I've heard that from military officers who have said, like, sometimes the most important thing in order to be a leader is to make a decision, even if it's wrong. And you can always change your mind, almost always. There's almost no instance in which you can't say, well, let's try something different.
And I was on a call the other day where somebody sort of listed you could make the right decision, you can make the wrong decision, but the worst decision is not making a decision. So
Yeah, that's a
I
really
sort
great
of,
way to put it. Yeah, I like that. So back to fun mishaps in the newsroom. I remember you mentioned something about when robotic cameras first came out. I know
oh
now
yeah.
bloggers like to use these, and actually I've sort of, Amazon Day's coming. I've been thinking about maybe picking one up, but they do have these cameras where you can set it out. And if you're doing bicycle tricks, or you're doing a yoga routine or whatever, and it'll follow you based on an automated program. But of course, in the news industry, you were at the spearhead of that. You probably had that technology almost first, if not first. And so of course there were probably bugs in it as well that had to be worked out.
Absolutely. So just to explain to people, back in the day, and this would be sort of late 80s, early 90s, and prior, a camera in a studio was operated by a camera operator. So that person would tilt up, tilt down, pan it, move it, whatever. And then I would say about the mid 90s, robotic cameras were the thing. So one camera operator could use a computer, a laptop as we do it now, and a joystick to move cameras, make them operate the way that we want them to. But in the early days, there were some funny stories. And so, as Patrick alluded to, so I was working at WTAE at that time, and we had it especially would happen on a noon newscast because it was sort of the first newscast of the day that people were in the studio. So cameras would move by themselves. So you'd hear in the background like two cameras would move and crash into each other, or you'd have cameras that would move and your anchor would be moving and moving and moving, trying to follow the camera. So, it was just, we laugh about it now, but at the time you're trying to put on a newscast. So it wasn't so funny. So a lot of those bugs have been worked out. And I would say it's an unusual situation that you would see something like that happen now in a newscast.
I have to admit that some of the videos that I've watched on YouTube are just news bloopers, and some of them are really funny because, well, I think it sets itself up. It's its own straight person, so like its own straight man, as it were,
Right.
using the comedic term, and it's because it's very dry, it's very to the point. That's what you're expecting, and so when something unexpected happens, that's what humor is. Humor, one kind of humor is when your expectations are defeated, and that's that's when you laugh.
So I have to tell you another story. So when
Please.
I was at WTE, once all the studio lights went out, so it was dark, so completely dark. And the people went on, my anchors went on reading the newscast until the lights came back on.
How?
So it's
With
kind of
the
one of those,
lighter or something? Like,
Hmm?
did they like flick a bic and read off of
I
a
guess there
script?
was enough light in the
Was it
in the
ambient light?
studio, not enough to show up on the TV, but they could still read their scripts. And
Okay.
that's another one of those, like, people ask, why do you still have a paper script in front of you? Well, that's because if the teleprompter goes down, you need to have something to read.
Sure.
So
It's always good to have a plan B. In fact,
you got to have one,
I have an audio recording going right now just
a
in case
plan,
if
a
the
plan
video
B,
were to go
C,
out,
and Z.
we'd still be able to use the audio.
Right, right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You probably have several layers of defense, though. Yeah.
We do.
So the paper scripts are one for sure. I imagine that. But
And trust me, as more technology has come into the scene, we've had even worse disasters where, servers that play back the video that would be in a newscast go down. So now what do you do?
right, we become more reliant on that. That's
Mhm.
one of the things that I've been trying to do. I mean, obviously, I'm just starting doing this program, but one of the things that I'm trying to do right now is to keep it as simple as possible, and because then there's less things that can go wrong,
Right,
right?
right.
But that's something that I'm
Absolutely.
just trying to learn how to live with. I have a friend, actually interviewed her for this program. Her name's Diane, and she's an astronomer. So she was giving a TED talk when TEDx was in Pittsburgh a
Hmm.
few years back, maybe 4 years ago, and
Hmm.
she was in a like kind of a she was dressed for the event, so she was in like an evening gown or an evening dress, and she had to use one hand for like her remote to do her PowerPoint presentation, right? So her clicker and the overhead, whatever. And then they were going to put a microphone on her, but there was nowhere to put a microphone on her. So she had no pockets. I mean, you could clip the thing, but the actual microphone, but then the transmitter or whatever, the box. So they're like, well, just hold it. And she's like, well, I got to hold with both these hands. I mean, I talk with my hands, I gesture a lot. So they ended up figuring out how to like kind of wrap it around her undergarment strap. We'll put it
I
that
was
way.
going to say, I could think of many ways that you
Yeah.
could do that,
So they
because
did
we've done
that.
that. We do that in TV news, right?
Yeah. And in fact,
Where am I going to hang this thing?
she has a picture of it, and she wants me to put it on her interview, and I may do that. But it's just funny that these, you do what you have to do, right? To get it, you just get it done. And
You do, and
yeah.
you do, and I think, I mean, that's what we do in TV news.
So thanks for talking about your career experience. But I'd love to talk to you about you're also a musician, and you've traveled a bit with that talent as well.
I have. So I'm a singer. I do play a little bit of piano and a little bit of guitar lamely. But my main musical tool is my voice. And so I've been singing since I was probably 3 years old. Sang in church, but come from a deep church background. My grandfather was a Methodist minister. Always sang in church choirs. But sort of what I would say is my greatest musical experience was singing with Mendelssohn Choir of Pittsburgh for about 15 years until my son, who's now 20, was born. And we sang with the symphony, with the best symphonies in the world, and singing the greatest choral music that there is to be had. And I still have a great passion for that. And I eventually I may go back and sing with Mendelssohn, but the COVID sort of stopped me from doing that. Yes, we traveled. So in college, I traveled Europe and sang with my college choir. With Mendelssohn, we went to Eastern Europe. Some of the greatest experiences that I've had, singing a Hebrew language song at Auschwitz was an amazing experience. I'm a big fan of Stephen Sondheim as my favorite choral conductor, or choral composer, if you will, of the modern era. Had an opportunity to sing his own songs to him at an event at the Weston William Penn, where he was honored. So had really amazing experiences singing with Mendelssohn. And I still do sing now. I sing in my church. I'm a soloist and I sing in the choir there. So my music is still very important to me. And I'll just say really quickly that I'm the president of the Pittsburgh Youth Chorus Board right now, because of my passion for choral music and kids being able to learn that and take part of that, take part in that. That's still a passion for me.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, you mentioned, there's a couple things there, but you mentioned Europe. Assuming that it were perfectly, there were no restrictions, there were nothing to worry about, and money were no object, where would you go back first, do you think?
Oh gosh, I probably would go back to the Czech Republic. I loved Prague. And when we went there, it was this was the early 90s, and so they were just coming out of communist rule. And as an aside, I had the fun opportunity to do some reports for WQED at that time, because I was still in the media, so I had the opportunity to sort of report on what we were doing. It was amazing to see the what was going on in the city, based on the fact that they were just coming out of communism. And so I would like to go back and see what the city looks like that was different than when I was there visiting.
Sure.
I've never been to Paris, so I would love to go there. I'd love to go back to England too, and Germany. So a lot of the Eastern European, or the Western European places that I would like to go. But if you asked me to pick one place, I would go back to the Czech Republic.
Nice. Well, you mentioned your volunteerism. You obviously, you said you're president of the take care of the youth choir,
The Pittsburgh Youth Chorus.
youth chorus. I apologize. And but you also helped feed people during the 2020 school lunch kind of thing.
Yes, so I serve on the board of the an organization called North Hills Cares. We're a very small organization. One of our goals is we call it create sustainable solutions to needs or problems that we see in the community. And by that we mean that we identified needs, we figure out ways to potentially solve them, and then we hand them over to other people so that we can go and find other needs in the community. But long story short, as you asked, we've run a summer lunch program for the past 3 years. And for me, what's been so startling might be a way to describe it, but it wouldn't be surprising to people, I don't think, to see that 3 years ago, we ran a summer lunch program because we saw the need for kids who get free and reduced school lunches at school during the school year. And that in the summer, that creates a real budget challenge for their families. So we had an in-person really nice in-person summer lunch program. Kids came, they interacted with each other. They went down to our new community center in Westview and had a great time there. So then, boom, here comes the COVID. And last summer, we had to do drive-by lunches, so grab and go lunches or delivery lunches. We saw probably, well, I would say that the first year of the school lunch, we had about 35-ish kids each day. Every week we had at least 300, if not more, doing the grab and go the next year. And we have about that many kids who are doing it this year as well. So we served 1,200 lunches and breakfasts last summer to families in our community who, again, rely on the breakfast and lunch at school. And in summertime, they're left to try to balance their budgets without that resource to them. And so we go twice a week and we make sandwiches and, bag up produce and those kinds of things, and then deliver or allow our families to come by and pick it up. And it's very gratifying to see families that we know would be desperate for food for their kids over the summer having a resource to be able to make sure that the kids are well fed and with healthy food as well. That's one of the things that we sort of key in on, that we have a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. It's not packaged stuff, and that's what we do. So it's fun.
Thank you for sharing that. I think, sometimes I think people, especially people who do a lot of volunteering, I think sometimes they're loath to draw attention to themselves because they don't want to seem like they're seeking glory or anything. But I think it's important for people to realize that there are needs out there, and that yes, human beings, individuals like you and I can do something to make a difference, especially in our own communities.
Well, and I think that food insecurity is still, I think it's become uh, more obvious to people during the pandemic, but it's something that people just didn't realize, that you live in a community. So I live in Ross Township, so I could imagine that everybody in my neighborhood is well fed, nobody's hungry. But how do I know that? My neighbor could have lost their job, they could have a medical condition, they could be elderly, all kinds of things could be going on with them that would cause them to have food insecurity. And so I think it's something that people are paying more attention to, but we need to pay more attention to, because that's a basic need. We all need food, right? And
Absolutely.
so, if I were to make a pitch, that I'm not saying donate to North Hills Cares, but the food bank is doing a phenomenal job. I would say that our Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank and their leadership has done a phenomenal job of leading uh, their organization through this pandemic and making sure people had enough to eat. So if there's one thing people could do, go onto their website and make a donation to them, because they just do a fantastic job, and they support organizations like ours and others in our community with food that we can just distribute on the local level. They're
Right.
definitely they're boots on the ground, and they're helping individual food pantries and communities make sure that the people in their own communities are well fed or have something to eat.
I know people that rely on that. That's
Yep,
that's an amazing thing.
absolutely.
Another thing that I've seen recently is, how you'll see these little book barns, they popped up a lot
We
where
have
people,
those.
yeah, you actually have one? That's
Well, no, so
fantastic.
they're not book barns. They're we call them little free pantries, and we have
Yes.
4 of them. So the organization with which I volunteer, we have 4 of them in our community, and it's kind of a leave what you can, take what you need kind of situation too, that's as grassroots as you possibly could get.
Yeah.
Where
There are two
I'll
that
go
are
put a couple
on,
of cans of something in there, and
yep,
if somebody needs it, they take it, and good for
there
you.
there are two on my radar that
Mhm.
that I, utilize that,
So yeah, if people haven't seen them, they look like the little free libraries that people, so it's like a box on a post, if you will.
right.
Right, people put books in them with the little free libraries, but it's the same concept, that you put food in there that people could take. I mean, my view is that it has to be something that somebody could take home and eat immediately. Um,
Right.
so
Open up
spaghetti
a can and
sauce,
just eat it. Something that doesn't
tuna,
require cooking.
peanut butter,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Those kinds of things.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Caloric dense foods are also
Hmm.
a good idea,
Hmm.
so. nut butters are really great,
Mhm.
really great example of that.
Well, I think things that are more expensive. So tuna's not cheap,
Right.
but it's
Yep.
healthy. So
Certainly is.
put
Yep.
some tuna in there.
And
That would be
filling.
good.
Yeah, and a lot of times I think with food scarcity, you're obviously you're looking for nutrition if possible, but a lot of times you're just looking to fill your belly until you get to a nutritious meal. So things like beans, rice, things that like will
Mhm.
fill you up for a good period of time. That's
Well, that's why I typically put boxes of pasta. So spaghetti and a can of sauce that could get me through a couple of days till I get to the next paycheck or whatever it is that I need to get to be able to buy the items that would fill my pantry.
you just described my junior year of college. That's how I got through. It was pasta and spaghetti sauce.
Right.
There was no time
And I
for anything else because
and
I
I
was
think a lot of
working.
us think too about like kids that adults can sort of fend for themselves, I guess, in many cases, but I really feel for kids that a plate of spaghetti and spaghettios with meatballs on it might be okay for tonight, and that's okay.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
that tends to be kind of the stuff that I buy and put in the little free pantries.
One other thing that I know about you that you do, which is amazing to me, is that you donate platelets,
I
which
do.
is which is which is a little more intensive than just donating a pint of blood. Like you have to like actually be there for a little bit, right? I mean, you don't just you're not in and out. Here's your sugar cookie. Here's your glass of orange juice. Bye bye. It's you know, a thoughtful thing that you do. It's really a thoughtful thing that you do.
So I started doing platelet donation when my late uh, brother-in-law was battling cancer. So that was my kind of my motivation or my reason to do it. But then I kept doing it. Recently, I've been doing plasma donation because that's what the blood bank has been wanting. Um, in terms of their demand. Yeah, you're right. If you go in and give blood, it takes you, I don't know, an hour max to get checked in and do the donation. The actual donation of plasma takes about 45 minutes, and the donation of platelets takes longer than that. I've had the luxury of being able to take some time to be able to do that, which is not something that everybody has. But it's I don't know. I don't know what I can do to convince people that that's a good idea, but you're saving somebody's life. And so that's what I always think. And it's 45 minutes of my time to maybe save a cancer patient or help them out in some way, or in the COVID, that people have needed plasma donations as well. And so I don't really view it as a sacrifice, if you will, because I'm there with my either with my computer or my phone multitasking, because that's what I
Right.
do.
Right. Which I would be doing anyway. I would be playing on my phone
Right.
anyway at some
Right.
point during the
So I
day.
might as well
Now,
have my arm stretched out while I'm on my phone with this finger. So
and yeah, have a good excuse, like look at what yes. So
yeah, and it's not, people view it as like, oh my gosh, a needle. No, whatever.
some
Once they
people are
put it in,
really,
you're good for the next 45 minutes.
yeah, some people are afraid of needles, but I think
Yes.
that phobia can be conquered,
Yes,
like most.
it can
Um,
be.
and so do they still give you a cookie afterwards?
They sure do. Or you could have chips and a
Yeah,
drink.
but cookies, but certainly not as good as your ginger snaps.
Oh, see, there you go with your transition.
Well, you know what I'm all about. I'm all about ginger snaps. You gave me that recipe, and it was a great recipe because I was even able to make them like taste similar to yours. Of course, not as good, but really, yep. And you handwrote a card for me. I still have in my pantry,
I did.
actually. Yeah, yeah. So that's wonderful. Well, I think we've had a good conversation here, Ann. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed
Do you
it.
want to know my secrets of making ginger snaps?
If you're willing to divulge them to the world at large, this may be viewed by millions of people
That's
someday.
fine. So, okay, ginger snaps have to have ginger, and they're going to have cinnamon in them too. But they have to have nutmeg and cloves in them. That's the secret.
The cloves are amazing. That flavor, and not too many, not overpowering, but just enough
Oh
to
no.
give it that dimension.
Absolutely. So I would say any recipe that you see, because people might look them up online, that they're going to require you to have ginger and cinnamon in them, but most don't require nutmeg and cloves, and that's, I think, what makes them so tasty.
Do they all have molasses in them as well, or is that
Yes,
okay?
I think that's a sort of a base thing for the recipe. You have to have baking molasses in them, but
I think I love that mellow flavor. I really like that added
yeah.
richness. You know, it gives it like a broad.
And I'll say one more thing is that baking is chemistry.
Yes,
So
yes.
people will say to me, "Oh, I'm a terrible baker because I just mix it all together and it doesn't turn out right." But
Measure,
it's chemistry, so follow your directions.
measure. Yep. And no
Measure
matter what,
right and follow your directions.
and no matter what recipe you get, even if you're an experienced baker, I'm speaking for myself, but I don't know. We'll see if if you
Hmm.
agree with me. Make it a few times the way the recipe calls for, and then you can modify. But try it, because you just don't know, and there is some variability. Even if you measure everything correctly and follow the procedures correctly, your oven may not have just may not have got up to temp at the right time, or the humidity might have been wrong, or so try it a couple times first, and then reduce the salt, or
Yeah,
then
right.
whatever add that extra ingredients that
I
you're
had
going
to buy a new oven about a year and a half ago, and I baked everything multiple times before I actually gave it to people because you're right. You have to, it's chemistry and it's trial and error.
yeah, yeah, it is.
My
And
husband eats the errors, and then when he's done with that, I serve it to other people.
usually if there's sugar in it, the errors aren't too bad. I mean,
Yeah,
you
right.
really have to burn things in order to like cover up the
True.
goodness of that sugar,
So true.
and it's hard to do. Well, that's not true. There are some, I mean, especially cookies. So like I have Toll House. It's basically the Toll House recipe. It's on the
Hmm.
chips, but there's a couple variations because
Hmm.
my grandmother, gave me the recipe. So there's shortening in there instead of all butter. There's more.
I have to say, I use shortening in most of my cookies,
Yeah, it makes a difference.
unless the flavor is built on, like if it's a very bland cookie, then I use butter in it because it could use the extra flavor. But
Mm.
otherwise, yeah, a chocolate chip cookie, a Toll House cookie, absolutely.
Yeah, it's
Shortening
not
is
on,
better.
that's not on the back of the package, but if you
No.
like half the butter and substitute it with shortening, you'll get a much fluffier, lighter cookie. And
Yes.
also it won't be flat, because the other ones come out real flat. And the other thing she did was she increased the brown sugar and decreased the granulated sugar. So it's about 2/3 brown and 1/3
Hmm.
granulated. And to me, that gives it that kind of richness that the molasses gives
That would be a
compared to
richer
the other one.
cookie, right?
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
so because people are always like, oh my gosh, you made these? What makes them so good? It's really just those two things. So
Yep.
sometimes it's really simple, but,
Yep.
or just,
Butter makes them flatter, and shortening makes them a little less flat. So yeah.
mhm. Yeah. So that's it. Unless you have something else you want to say, I think we're
I
good.
have no other wisdom to deliver today that I can think of.
I think you've given us plenty of wisdom today. And yes, we'll take a moment to digest that. And now I'm gonna go eat some cookies because I'm thinking
Mhm.
about them. So
Feel free to share my recipe with all who request.
maybe I'll put it in the description box
Yeah,
down.
that would be a good idea.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, great. All right. Well, that's it for now. Everybody, please smash like because that helps the algorithm and helps more people to hear and see us, and see if you can do something nice today for someone without getting caught. Have a great day. Thank you again, Ian. This was wonderful.